Desire, risk, and forbidden passion. This is the story of how I fell for the one person I shouldn't have. London glittered beneath Avery Whitmore like something she had purchased and forgotten about. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Canary Wharf penthouse, the city looked obedient. Structured. Predictable. Glass towers reflecting ambition back at itself. The Thames cutting through it all like a deliberate signature. Avery liked things that behaved. Markets. Meetings. Numbers. People were less reliable. She stood barefoot on marble floors that cost more than most annual salaries, blazer still on despite the hour. Her reflection in the glass was sharp, navy suit tailored within a millimeter of perfection, dark hair pulled back, posture engineered. At 36, she had built Whitmore Global Holdings into one of the most aggressive investment firms in Europe. She had inherited capital, yes, but she had multiplied it. Refined it. Weaponized it. The press called her ruthless. The board called her visionary. Her father used to call her adequate. Avery loosened her collar slightly. Behind her, her phone vibrated across the stone kitchen island. Clara. Avery let it buzz twice before answering. Yes. You're still at home, right? Clara's voice carried its usual efficiency, but there was a thread of something else beneath it. Calculation, perhaps. I live here, Avery replied dryly. You know that's not what I meant. Avery walked toward the kitchen and poured herself sparkling water instead of the wine she was considering. Tomorrow's acquisition briefing is ready. The Berlin numbers are stronger than projected. Daniel is still pushing back. A flicker of irritation tightened Avery's jaw. Daniel Mercer, senior partner, legacy board favorite, professionally threatened by her existence. He can push, she said. He'll still lose. A pause. Then Clara exhaled. You've cancelled 3 personal engagements this month. Avery stared at the city. I didn't realize you were tracking my social calendar for emotional well-being. I am. Another silence. You work, Clara continued carefully. You win. You come home. You work more. That's not balance. Avery leaned one shoulder against the counter. Balance is a myth sold to people who can't compete. And loneliness? That word landed differently. Avery didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward the far end of the penthouse, toward the dim corridor that led to the private quarters. Everything immaculate. Everything silent. I'm not lonely, she said. Clara's response was gentle. You're alone. The distinction irritated her more than it should have. I don't have time for this. Make time, Clara replied. One evening. That's all I'm asking. For what? A blind date. Avery laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. Absolutely not. You said you didn't want another executive. Or investor. Or politician. You said you wanted someone who didn't know your net worth before your birthday. Avery closed her eyes briefly. She had said that. Months ago. Late. Careless. I was tired, she muttered. You were honest. Silence again. Then Clara added, quieter, you deserve to be seen without performance. Avery disliked how that sentence made her chest tighten. She finished her water. One date, Clara pressed. Anonymous. No job titles. Neutral location. If it's terrible, I'll never bring it up again. Avery walked back to the window. The city shimmered. Controlled. Conquered. She thought about the last woman she had dated, a venture capitalist who had introduced her to friends as a strategic asset. She thought about the one before that, who had liked the headlines more than her. She thought about how quiet this penthouse felt every night. One date, she said finally. You have terrible instincts, Clara. I hope you know that. Clara's grin was audible through the phone. Saturday. 7 p.m. Shoreditch. Reservation under A. Avery ended the call before she could change her mind. Across the penthouse, in the soft echo of marble and glass, another woman moved unnoticed. Lucia Moretti had perfected invisibility. She stepped from the utility hallway carrying freshly pressed shirts folded over one arm. Her movements were precise, quiet, respectful of space that did not belong to her. She knew the rhythm of this home. The way Avery's heels sounded different when she was angry. The way she left her blazer draped over the same chair when exhausted. The way she stood at the window after midnight, motionless. Lucia never stared. But she observed. She had arrived in London 3 years earlier with 2 suitcases and an accent she worked carefully to soften. Her mother still lived in Naples. Every month, Lucia sent money home without fail. The penthouse job had come through a private domestic staffing agency. Live-in. Discreet. Excellent pay. High standards, the recruiter had warned. Lucia preferred high standards. They were clearer than shifting expectations. Tonight, she stepped quietly into the master bedroom. Avery hadn't noticed her presence. From the doorway, Lucia saw her employer silhouetted against London's glow, strong, composed, untouchable. Except for the loosened collar. Lucia set the shirts inside the wardrobe with meticulous care. Navy. Charcoal. White. Ordered like chess pieces. She should leave. Instead, she hesitated. Avery's shoulders looked tense. Not powerful, strained. Lucia wondered, briefly, what that woman looked like without the armor. Then Avery turned slightly, catching movement in her peripheral vision. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Lucia dropped her gaze immediately. "I didn't realize you were still working," Avery said, voice neutral. "I was finishing the pressing," Lucia replied softly. Her voice carried warmth even when measured. Avery studied her properly for perhaps the first time in months. Dark hair pinned loosely. Simple blouse. Calm presence. "What time is it?" Avery asked. "Almost 9. Avery frowned slightly. "You should clock out." Lucia nodded. "Of course." She moved toward the door. "Lucia." She paused. "Yes, Ms. Whitmore." Avery disliked the title in that moment, though she couldn't have said why. "Thank you," Avery said. Lucia blinked once, surprised. For maintaining order." Lucia allowed herself the smallest smile. "It's my job." She left quietly. But her pulse felt strangely unsettled. Later that night, long after the penthouse lights dimmed, Lucia passed through the living area to retrieve a forgotten cloth. She saw Avery again at the window. Still standing. Still staring. Lucia hesitated in the shadows. The city looked so alive from here. But Avery looked alone. Lucia turned away before she could linger too long. Because it was not her place to wonder about the woman who signed her paychecks. Saturday arrived with winter sunlight sharp and pale. Avery spent the morning in meetings. Daniel Mercer challenged projections with thinly veiled condescension. "Distractions are costly," he remarked during the Berlin discussion. Avery's gaze was glacial. "I don't entertain distractions." Daniel held her eyes a moment too long. "Good." She dismissed him with numbers. By 6:30, she was home, standing before her wardrobe. This felt absurd. She selected a black tailored suit, understated, elegant. No jewelry beyond her watch. Neutral. Controlled. She told herself she wasn't nervous. She simply disliked unpredictability. Across the penthouse, Lucia folded towels, unaware that the evening would tilt her world. Clara had called her 2 nights earlier. "I need a favor," Clara had said gently. Lucia nearly dropped the silver tray she was polishing. "A favor? A blind date?" Lucia had laughed in confusion. "I think you misunderstand my role here." "I understand it perfectly," Clara replied. This has nothing to do with your employment. Lucia's stomach tightened. She had avoided London dating entirely. Too complicated. Too exposed. With who? She asked cautiously. Anonymous. She won't know who you are. You won't know who she is. Lucia considered declining. But something about the request, about Clara's tone, felt deliberate. Why me? Lucia asked. A pause. Because you see more than you say, Clara answered. Lucia didn't know what that meant. But she agreed. Perhaps out of curiosity. Perhaps out of loneliness she would never admit. At 6:58, Avery stepped into a small, candlelit restaurant in Shoreditch. Intimate. Warm. Not her usual territory. The hostess smiled. Reservation for A? Yes. She was seated at a corner table. Avery adjusted her cuffs, steady, composed. Then the door opened again. Lucia stepped inside. She wore a simple navy dress that skimmed her figure without demanding attention. Hair down tonight, loose around her shoulders. She scanned the room nervously. Her eyes landed on Avery. Everything stilled. Lucia recognized her instantly. The woman who owned the penthouse. The woman who stood at windows like she was searching for something she couldn't acquire. Avery did not recognize her. Not like this. Without uniform. Without lowered gaze. Without context. Avery stood automatically. Professional reflex. But something else flickered behind her eyes. Interest. Lucia approached slowly. The hostess smiled between them. Reservation for L. The air shifted. Avery extended her hand. I'm Avery. Lucia hesitated only half a heartbeat before taking it. Her touch was warm. Steady. Lucia. And in that moment, before titles, before revelation, before power rebalanced itself, two women stood across from each other without knowing how deeply their worlds were already intertwined. Avery gestured to the seat opposite. Lucia sat. Neither walked away. And somewhere high above Canary Wharf, a penthouse waited, unaware that its silence was about to be broken. Lucia hesitated only half a heartbeat before taking it. Her touch was warm. Steady. Lucia. And in that moment, before titles, before revelation, before power rebalanced itself, two women stood across from each other without knowing how deeply their worlds were already intertwined. Avery gestured to the seat opposite. Lucia sat. Neither walked away. And somewhere high above Canary Wharf, a penthouse waited, unaware that its silence was about to be broken. Now she sat across from that employer, though technically, she did not. Not here. Not tonight. The restaurant lighting was soft enough to flatter vulnerability. Candles flickered against exposed brick. The low murmur of other conversations created a cocoon of anonymity. Avery Whitmore. Out of context. Without the skyline behind her. Lucia folded her hands in her lap beneath the table so Avery wouldn't see them tremble. She had considered not coming. After recognizing the name on the reservation confirmation Clara sent, she told herself it was coincidence. Until she walked in. Until she saw her. And Avery had looked at her with polite curiosity. Not recognition. Not ownership. Curiosity. It did something strange to Lucia's heartbeat. So, Avery said, resting her hands lightly on the table. Do you do blind dates often? Lucia allowed herself a small smile. No. Good, Avery replied. I was beginning to question my decision-making. Lucia laughed softly before she could stop herself. It startled them both. Avery's eyebrow lifted slightly. That's a reassuring sound. What is? Laughter. It means I haven't completely misjudged the situation. Lucia tilted her head. You think in terms of judgment often? A flicker passed through Avery's eyes. Brief. Sharp. I'm paid to. There it was. Not a lie. Not the full truth. Lucia felt the tension humming beneath Avery's composure, the same tension she sensed at midnight when she watched her from the hallway. Do you enjoy it? Lucia asked gently. Avery seemed slightly surprised by the question. Enjoy what? Judging. A pause. No, Avery said finally. I enjoy clarity. Lucia considered that. Clarity was a luxury too. The waiter arrived. Wine was poured. Menus opened. Lucia focused carefully on breathing normally. She could not let this slip into dangerous territory. She could not blur lines. But the way Avery watched her, attentive, measured, interested, made it difficult to retreat into invisibility. What about you? Avery asked. What do you do? The question landed like a test. Lucia had rehearsed this answer. I take care of people's homes. Avery's lips curved slightly. That sounds deceptively broad. It's practical. And meaningful? Avery pressed. Lucia met her eyes. Yes. There was no shame in her voice. And Avery noticed. Lucia could see it, the recalibration. The way Avery leaned in slightly. What do you like about it? Avery asked. Lucia hesitated, then answered honestly. I like restoring order to things that feel chaotic. I like noticing what people forget about themselves. The way they leave a book open when they're stressed. The way they stop watering plants when they're overwhelmed. Avery went very still. Lucia realized, a second too late, that she might have revealed too much. That's observant, Avery said carefully. Lucia smiled faintly. It's my job to notice. Avery held her gaze longer this time. And for the first time since sitting down, something shifted in the air between them. Not employer and staff. Not status and salary. Two women studying each other. Lucia became aware of her own body in a way she hadn't expected. The way the candlelight caught in Avery's dark hair. The deliberate precision in her posture. The subtle relaxation happening minute by minute. Avery removed her blazer halfway through the meal. Lucia had folded that blazer dozens of times. Seeing it draped over the back of a restaurant chair instead of a penthouse seat felt almost intimate. Dangerous. Can I ask something slightly intrusive? Avery said after a moment. Lucia's pulse skipped. You can ask. What made you move here? London. The question was simple. The answer was layered. Opportunity, Lucia said first. That's diplomatic. Lucia exhaled softly. My mother still works too hard, she admitted. I wanted to send money home. I wanted independence. Avery's gaze softened, barely, but Lucia caught it. Independence from what? From needing anyone. The honesty surprised even her. Avery leaned back slightly, studying her. That's not independence, Avery said quietly. Lucia frowned faintly. What is, then? Choosing someone, Avery replied. The statement hung between them. Lucia's throat tightened unexpectedly. You sound like you've thought about that, she said. Avery gave a humorless smile. I think about everything. Yes, Lucia murmured before she could stop herself. Avery tilted her head. What does that mean? Lucia swallowed. Careful. It means you seem like someone who anticipates outcomes. Avery's eyes narrowed slightly in intrigue. Do I? Yes. And is that a flaw? Lucia hesitated. Yes, she said gently. If it stops you from feeling something before you've measured it. Silence. Not awkward. Charged. Avery did not look offended. She looked interested. You're unexpectedly bold, Avery observed. Lucia felt warmth rise to her cheeks. I didn't intend to be. Don't apologize, Avery said softly. It's refreshing. The waiter returned with dessert menus. Neither woman looked at them immediately. Lucia became acutely aware of the line she was walking. At home, Avery's world was structured around hierarchy. Schedules. Power. Order. Here, there was none of that. Here, Avery was simply a woman who loosened her collar and asked careful questions. Lucia wondered if Avery ever realized how much she revealed when she wasn't commanding a room. Tell me something no one else knows about you, Avery said suddenly. Lucia blinked. That's a dangerous request. Why? Because you might not like the answer. Avery's eyes darkened slightly. Try me. Lucia considered lying. Instead, she said, I'm afraid of being invisible forever. The confession slipped out before she could retrieve it. Avery's expression shifted. Something real. You don't seem invisible, she said quietly. Lucia almost laughed. You don't see most of the people who make your life function, she replied. Avery went still again. Lucia immediately regretted the phrasing. She had edged too close to the truth. But instead of bristling, Avery asked softly, and do you resent that? Lucia shook her head. No. I chose it. That doesn't mean you deserve to disappear. The gentleness in Avery's tone startled her. Lucia's chest felt too tight. Tell me something no one knows about you, she countered softly. Avery hesitated. For a woman so fluent in negotiation, vulnerability did not come easily. Then she said, I don't know who I am when I'm not succeeding. Lucia felt that sentence like a physical thing. Not arrogance. Fear. Maybe you don't need to succeed, Lucia said. Avery's lips curved faintly. You don't know what I do. Lucia met her gaze steadily. Maybe I don't need to. Another pause. Longer now. Lucia became aware that Avery's hand rested close to hers on the table. Close enough that the warmth radiated. Close enough that it would take only a slight movement to touch. Lucia told herself not to. Avery moved first. Not deliberately. Her fingers brushed Lucia's. It was accidental. It was electric. Both women inhaled at the same time. Neither withdrew immediately. Lucia's pulse roared in her ears. Avery's gaze dropped to their hands, then lifted back to Lucia's face. Permission. Question. Possibility. Lucia let her fingers remain. Just for a second longer. Then she pulled back gently. Because this was complicated. Because this was dangerous. Because tomorrow, she would return to folding that blazer. Avery cleared her throat slightly. I'm glad I came, she said. Lucia smiled, softer now. So am I. And for the first time since moving to London, Lucia felt something shift inside her. Not ambition. Not survival. Hope. Later that night, when Lucia returned to the penthouse before Avery, careful to arrive first, she stood in the dark living room. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass. She imagined Avery standing here, unaware that the woman she had just shared wine with was the same woman who polished her kitchen counters. Lucia pressed her palm lightly against the cool window. This was reckless. This was impossible. This was already too much. But when the elevator chimed minutes later and Avery stepped inside, pausing in the doorway, unaware she wasn't alone, Lucia saw something new in her posture. A softness. A distraction. A flicker of something unmeasured. And Lucia realized, with a mixture of terror and longing. She was no longer just observing the woman who owned the skyline. She was falling for her. Clara Hastings did not believe in fate. She believed in strategy. Which was why she had orchestrated the blind date with the precision of a corporate takeover. From her desk on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Global Holdings, Clara could see most of London through reinforced glass. The view was impressive. but not as impressive as Avery Whitmore running a room. Clara had worked for Avery for 6 years. 6 years of watching her outmaneuver billionaires. 6 years of watching men twice her age underestimate her. 6 years of watching her win. And 6 years of watching her go home alone. It wasn't dramatic loneliness. Avery would have despised drama. It was quieter than that. It was the way she lingered in the office long after meetings ended. The way she deflected personal questions with surgical precision. The way she once admitted, at 11:47 p.m., while reviewing quarterly projections. I don't think anyone has ever loved me without calculating the benefit. Clara had pretended not to hear the vulnerability in that sentence. But she had. And it stayed with her. The idea came to Clara on an ordinary Tuesday. Lucia had been in the penthouse when Clara stopped by with paperwork requiring Avery's signature. Clara rarely paid attention to staff beyond courtesy. Efficiency mattered more than familiarity. But Lucia moved differently. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She simply existed. While Avery spoke sharply on a call in the living area, Lucia passed through quietly with a tray of fresh coffee. Not once did she interrupt. Not once did she flinch. But Clara noticed something else. When Avery ended the call and stood staring at the skyline, shoulders tight, Lucia paused just long enough to assess her. Not critically. Not admiringly. Observantly. As if she were memorizing a painting no one else saw. Clara filed that away. Later, in the kitchen, Clara found herself alone with Lucia. "You've worked here long?" Clara asked casually. 2 years, Lucia replied. "You like it?" Lucia hesitated, honest hesitation, not rehearsed. "It's stable," she said. Clara studied her. "And Ms. Whitmore?" Lucia's eyes flickered briefly toward the living room. "She is disciplined." Clara almost smiled. "That's one word." Lucia allowed a faint one in return. "She works very hard." There was no resentment in her tone. No envy. Only quiet recognition. Clara had worked around enough people to recognize when admiration crossed into something softer. Lucia wasn't there. But she was closer than she realized. The decision wasn't romantic. It was logical. Avery needed someone who did not orbit her wealth. Lucia existed outside that orbit, at least emotionally. Yes, there was a power imbalance. Yes, it was risky. But Clara calculated risk for a living. If Avery met Lucia as an equal, stripped of titles, something real might emerge. Clara told herself it was an experiment. She told herself she wasn't meddling. She told herself she was helping. Convincing Avery had been the easier part. Convincing Lucia required more care. Clara invited her to the small office adjacent to the penthouse utility corridor. Lucia stood politely near the door, hands folded. "I need a favor," Clara began. Lucia's brows lifted slightly. "Of course. It's not work-related." That made her visibly wary. Clara admired that. "A blind date," she clarified gently. Lucia stared at her as if she had misheard. "I'm sorry?" "Anonymous. No titles. Neutral location." Lucia shook her head immediately. "That isn't appropriate. It has nothing to do with Ms. Whitmore professionally." Lucia's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly at the name. Clara caught it. "It's just dinner," Clara continued. "You deserve a life outside these walls." Lucia's jaw tightened slightly. "I have a life." "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "But when was the last time someone asked what you wanted?" That question landed. Lucia didn't answer immediately. Clara leaned forward slightly. "You are intelligent. You are observant. You are far more than invisible." Lucia's throat moved as she swallowed. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "I know enough," Clara replied. Silence stretched. Then Lucia asked cautiously, and this woman? She asked for someone who wouldn't know her resume before her personality. Lucia almost smiled. That sounds naive. It sounds hopeful. Lucia exhaled slowly. This is a mistake, she murmured. Possibly, Clara agreed. But not a cruel one. Another pause. Then, softly. Yes. Clara expected many possible outcomes from the blind date. Awkwardness. Disinterest. Polite closure. She did not expect to receive a text from Avery at 10:52 p.m. She's different. Clara stared at the message. Different was not a word Avery used lightly. Clara typed back carefully. See, in a bad way? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Returned. No. Clara leaned back in her chair. For the first time since orchestrating this plan, she felt something like nerves. But strategy rarely accounts for emotion. And emotion does not respect hierarchy. The following morning, Clara arrived at the office early. Avery was already there. That alone was unusual for a Sunday. She stood by the window in the executive suite, coffee untouched on her desk. You're here early, Clara said lightly. Avery didn't turn immediately. I don't think she knew who I was, Avery said. Clara kept her voice neutral. You asked for that. Yes. A pause. And? Avery turned finally. There was something unsettled in her expression. Something Clara had never seen in a boardroom. She challenged me, Avery said quietly. Clara's brows lifted. Challenged how? She said I measure feelings before I experience them. Clara almost laughed. That's accurate. Avery shot her a look. Do you think I do that? She asked. Clara didn't answer immediately. Yes, she said gently. Avery exhaled slowly. I didn't want to leave. That admission felt significant. Clara studied her carefully. And did you? Yes. Will you see her again? Avery hesitated. Then, with less certainty than Clara had ever heard from her. I hope so. That was the moment Clara understood something had shifted beyond her control. Because hope, in Avery Whitmore, was rare. And dangerous. That evening, Clara reviewed the schedule for the coming week. Berlin acquisition. Board review. Investor dinner. And penciled in quietly between them. Thursday, 8 p.m. A second date. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. She had wanted to help Avery find something real. But reality, Clara knew, was rarely neat. Especially when secrets were involved. Especially when the woman Avery was falling for folded her shirts every morning. Clara told herself she would reveal the truth soon. After the second date, perhaps. Or the third. Before anyone got hurt. She told herself she was still in control. She had no idea she wasn't. Meanwhile, in the penthouse above Canary Wharf, Lucia stood alone in the master bedroom, holding one of Avery's tailored jackets. Her fingers brushed the fabric slowly. She remembered the way Avery's hand had felt against hers. Warm. Intentional. She closed her eyes briefly. This is not yours, she whispered to herself. But her heart did not listen. And across the city, in a glass office overlooking the Thames, Avery Whitmore stared at her phone screen, at a number saved only as Lucia, debating whether to text first. For a woman who controlled markets, the uncertainty felt unfamiliar. Unsettling. Exhilarating. And somewhere between strategy and surrender, something far more complicated than a blind date had begun. Avery Whitmore did not text first. She drafted the message 3 times. Deleted it twice. Stared at the screen longer than she cared to admit. Finally. Avery. I enjoyed last night. If you'd like to continue the experiment, I'm free Thursday. She pressed send before she could overthink it. For someone who negotiated 9-figure deals without hesitation, the wait for a reply felt absurdly intimate. 3 minutes later. Lucia. I'd like that. No emojis. No hesitation. No performance. Avery allowed herself a small, private smile. Thursday arrived faster than expected. The week had been relentless. Berlin negotiations dragged. Daniel Mercer questioned timelines with thinly veiled skepticism. Investors pressed for accelerated growth. Normally, Avery thrived under pressure. But at 7:42 p.m., mid-discussion with 2 senior analysts, she glanced at the time and said, "We'll conclude this tomorrow." The room fell silent. Daniel blinked. Tomorrow? Yes. There are unresolved variables. They'll still be unresolved in 12 hours. Avery gathered her tablet calmly. Daniel studied her. You have plans? A flicker of something cool crossed her face. Yes. She left before he could ask more. Lucia had chosen a small cafe in Notting Hill this time. Neutral ground. Brighter than the restaurant. Less intimate. Safer. She arrived early, nerves threaded tightly beneath her calm exterior. She had considered canceling. Every morning since Saturday had been an exercise in composure. Folding Avery's clothes. Restocking the kitchen. Moving through rooms where their conversation now echoed. And Avery had been different. Subtle. But different. Quieter in the mornings. Less sharp with instructions. Once, dangerously, she had almost said Lucia's name in a tone too familiar. Lucia had stepped away before it could settle. Now, sitting at a small marble table near the window, she told herself this was manageable. 2 separate worlds. They would remain separate. The bell above the cafe door chimed. Avery stepped inside. No suit tonight. Dark trousers. Soft gray sweater. Hair loose. Lucia's breath caught involuntarily. Avery spotted her almost immediately. And smiled. Not the corporate smile. Not the polite one. The one Lucia had seen flicker briefly at dinner. Hi, Avery said as she approached. Hi. They stood there for half a second too long before sitting. You look different, Lucia said carefully. Less threatening? Avery offered. Lucia shook her head. Less guarded. Avery studied her. You notice everything. It's a habit. Is it ever exhausting? Avery asked. Yes, Lucia admitted softly. The honesty felt easier this time. They ordered coffee. The cafe hummed around them, students with laptops, couples leaning close, a child dragging a scarf across the floor. Normal. Grounded. Avery wrapped her hands around her cup. I almost canceled tonight, she confessed. Lucia's heart dipped. Why? Because I don't do undefined. Lucia tilted her head. And this is undefined? Yes. And that frightens you? Avery held her gaze. Yes. Lucia smiled faintly. Good. Avery blinked. Good. It means you can't control it. There was no mockery in her tone. Only quiet truth. Avery leaned back slightly. You enjoy unsettling me. I don't intend to. But you do. Lucia considered that. Maybe you're just not used to being unsettled. Avery laughed, softer than usual. Possibly. The conversation flowed more easily this time. They spoke about small things first. Lucia's favorite part of London, the markets in Portobello. Avery's least favorite corporate cliché, we're like family. Books. Music. Childhood memories. Lucia learned that Avery once wanted to be an architect. I like structure, Avery said. That's obvious, Lucia teased gently. Avery smiled. I also like space. Lucia felt the double meaning settle between them. And you? Avery asked. What did you want to be? Lucia hesitated. An interior designer. The confession felt raw. Why didn't you? Avery asked. Lucia looked down at her coffee. Because dreams are expensive. Avery's expression shifted. Not pity. Recognition. Not always, she said quietly. Lucia met her gaze. In my world, they were. Silence. The cafe noise faded into background hum. Avery leaned forward slightly. You shouldn't have to choose between survival and ambition. Lucia's chest tightened unexpectedly. That's easy to say. Is it? Yes, Lucia replied gently. Some of us don't start with safety nets. Avery held her eyes steadily. You think I did? Lucia hesitated. I don't know. Avery looked out the window briefly, watching pedestrians blur past. My father believed affection was a weakness, she said quietly. Achievement was currency. Love was conditional. Lucia didn't speak. She understood conditional. He told me once, Avery continued, that if I wanted respect, I needed to be untouchable. Lucia's voice was soft. And are you? Avery turned back to her. No. The word lingered. Lucia felt something shift deeper this time. Not flirtation. Understanding. After coffee, they walked. Notting Hill streets glowed in early evening light. Shop windows reflected soft gold. The air carried the faint chill of approaching winter. They didn't plan the walk. It just happened. Their shoulders brushed once. Then again. Lucia's awareness of proximity felt amplified. You're quiet, Avery observed. I'm thinking. Dangerous. Lucia smiled slightly. About what this becomes. Avery didn't answer immediately. She watched a dog tug impatiently at its leash across the street. I don't know, she admitted. Lucia stopped walking. Avery turned to face her. You don't know, Lucia repeated. I don't enter situations without clarity. And yet you did. Yes. Why? Avery's gaze softened. Because when you speak, I forget to calculate. Lucia's breath faltered. The honesty was unfiltered. Dangerous. They stood there, the city moving around them. Lucia became acutely aware of the space between their hands. So close. So easy. Avery stepped slightly closer. May I? She asked quietly. Lucia's heart pounded. Yes. Avery's fingers brushed hers again. Intentional this time. Slow. Lucia inhaled sharply. The contact was simple. But it sent something electric through her chest. Avery's thumb traced lightly against her knuckles. See? Lucia whispered. Unmeasured. Avery's voice dropped. Maybe I'm learning. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the air between them felt like it might ignite. Across the city, Daniel Mercer stood in Avery's office, waiting. When she returned 2 hours later than scheduled, he didn't hide his irritation. You've been difficult to reach, he said. Avery removed her coat calmly. I was occupied. With? She met his gaze evenly. Something that doesn't concern you. Daniel studied her. You're distracted. I'm human. That's precisely my concern. Avery's expression cooled instantly. My performance metrics remain unchanged. For now, Daniel replied. She stepped closer, voice controlled but edged. Be careful, Daniel. He held her gaze. Of what? Confusing personal curiosity with professional oversight. He smiled thinly. I only care about the company. Avery didn't respond. But something in her eyes warned him not to push further. That night, in the penthouse, Lucia stood in the kitchen, reorganizing spice jars she had already arranged twice. She could still feel Avery's hand. Still hear her voice. When you speak, I forget to calculate. Lucia pressed her palms against the counter. This was slipping. She was slipping. Because when Avery stepped into the apartment an hour later, Lucia looked up instinctively. And Avery looked back. The moment stretched. Different now. Charged. Good night, Ms. Whitmore, Lucia said carefully. Avery hesitated. Then, softly. Good night. Lucia. Not formal. Not distant. Just her name. Lucia felt it like a touch. And when Avery disappeared down the hallway, Lucia realized something undeniable. The second meeting hadn't clarified anything. It had made everything infinitely more complicated. And infinitely harder to resist. The penthouse was quiet, but Avery Whitmore could hear every footstep, every breath, every faint scrape of silverware in the kitchen below. She had returned from a late dinner with investors, a glass of water in hand, but her mind wasn't on the deals, numbers, or the quarterly reports. It was on Lucia. Lucia, who had walked down the cobbled streets of Notting Hill that afternoon and somehow left her presence lingering like a faint perfume. Avery leaned against the marble counter, eyes tracing the familiar lines of her apartment. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant tonight. She wasn't thinking about the market. She wasn't thinking about her acquisitions. She was thinking about how warm Lucia's hand had felt against hers, intentional, daring, gentle. Lucia moved quietly through the kitchen, carefully arranging leftover coffee cups in the dishwasher. Her movements were precise, practiced, almost ritualistic, but tonight there was something different in the way she paused mid-step, as if the air itself had changed. Avery cleared her throat. Lucia? Lucia jumped slightly, then turned. Yes, Ms. Whitmore. Her voice was soft, even, but it carried a subtle tension, as if she were expecting something unpredictable. Did you see the game last night? Avery asked casually, though her fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. She hated casual conversation. But this felt necessary, a bridge. Lucia hesitated, almost imperceptibly, before shaking her head. No. I don't follow sports much. Avery tilted her head. Something in her expression softened, almost imperceptibly. It's fine. Not everyone needs to be competitive. Lucia allowed herself a small smile. Good to know. Though I suspect you are. The comment hung in the air, charged. Avery's lips curved faintly. A corner of warmth she rarely allowed herself. You're observant, she said quietly. Lucia looked away, pretending to inspect the countertop. It's part of the job. Avery studied her. For the first time, really studied her, outside of the penthouse or work hierarchy. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. Her blouse was simple, elegant in its restraint. She wasn't an employee tonight. She wasn't anyone's subordinate. She was simply present. The thought unsettled Avery more than she expected. Later, Avery found herself sitting in the living room with the city lights reflected in her glass walls. She hadn't planned to stay up. But sleep seemed impossible with the memory of Lucia's voice lingering in her mind. Footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble. Avery's head turned before she realized it. Lucia stood in the doorway, holding a folded shirt. I didn't want to disturb you, Lucia said, carefully. Her eyes flicked to the glass walls, as though noting the expanse separating them from the city below. You didn't, Avery replied. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. But now that you're here, I'm glad you didn't leave. Lucia blinked. That tone, so soft, so careful, made her chest tighten. Avery gestured toward the sofa. Sit. For a moment. Lucia hesitated, then complied. perching at the edge as if she were balancing on an invisible line between professionalism and intimacy. Avery began, then stopped. She wasn't used to starting sentences like this. Not with anyone. I enjoyed tonight, she said finally, forcing simplicity. You make things feel lighter. Lucia's pulse quickened. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Avery replied, moving slightly closer. The faint scent of her sweater, soft, clean, faintly sharp, hit Lucia before she could think. Lucia's eyes flicked down to Avery's hand, resting casually on the arm of the sofa, then back up. Ms. Whitmore, she whispered. Yes? Avery's gaze softened. I like being around you. Outside work. Outside, everything else. Lucia swallowed. Her carefully constructed walls trembled. I like that too. The space between them shrank imperceptibly. Avery's fingers brushed against Lucia's again, this time, deliberate. Warmth surged. Electricity, yes, but also something heavier. Something dangerously real. Lucia's breath caught. Her hand twitched, nearly brushing Avery's. But she froze, aware of every boundary she had sworn to maintain. You're quiet, Avery murmured, noticing her hesitation. I'm thinking, Lucia admitted, voice low. About this. About you. Avery leaned back slightly, but her eyes never left hers. Do you ever let yourself want things? Lucia hesitated. I try to be careful. Careful, Avery repeated. She smiled faintly, softly, like she was teasing herself more than anyone else. I've spent years measuring everything. Measuring outcomes, risks, failures, and I haven't measured you. Not really. And yet. I want to. Lucia's pulse thundered in her ears. She had folded that blazer 100 times. She had cleaned these floors countless times. And yet tonight, here, now, she felt exposed in a way no professional proximity had ever allowed. Then, let yourself, she whispered. Avery's hand found hers, fingers entwining briefly. A spark. The unspoken acknowledgement of shared risk. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the air between them was heavier. Charged. Electric. Dangerous. And for the first time, both of them realized that lines, professional, social, emotional, had begun to blur irreversibly. Lucia looked into Avery's eyes, and somewhere deep inside, she admitted a truth she couldn't yet voice aloud: she was falling. Avery, sensing the same pull, didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The city outside could wait. Here, in this quiet living room, the impossible had begun. London had begun to rain. Not the steady drizzle that coated the streets with polite grey. This was urgent, insistent, drumming on windows like the city itself demanded attention. Avery Whitmore stood at her penthouse window, sleeves pushed up, the city lights reflected in her dark eyes. Rain streaked the glass in chaotic patterns, refracting the glow of street lamps into jagged lines. She wasn't thinking about Berlin, acquisitions, or quarterly projections. Tonight, none of that mattered. She was thinking about Lucia. Lucia arrived quietly, knocking softly before stepping in. The rain had plastered her hair to her shoulders, strands clinging to her cheeks. Her coat was damp, gloves folded neatly in her hand. I didn't mean to show up like this, she said, voice soft, almost apologetic. You're perfect, Avery said without hesitation. The words startled them both. Not perfect in some aesthetic way, but in the way that mattered, here, present, alive. Lucia blinked. You're here, Avery continued, stepping closer. That's what matters. Lucia's heart raced. She felt it in her chest, in the tips of her fingers. She had folded blazers and polished floors. She had memorized routines. And now, this, the unpredictability of being wanted, was dizzying. Avery closed the distance. The air between them condensed, heavy with warmth and tension. Lucia barely had time to think before Avery's hand brushed hers. Just a light, tentative touch, but enough to send a jolt through her entire body. Lucia started, then stopped. Shoo, Avery whispered. No need to say anything. Lucia's eyes searched hers. Storm clouds outside mirrored the turbulence inside her. I shouldn't, she whispered, as if the words alone could create a boundary. You shouldn't what? Avery asked softly. Feel this. Want this. You. Avery silenced her by leaning forward, closing the final inches between them. Their lips met, not urgent, not demanding, but slow, testing, discovering. Lucia felt the world shrink. The city, the skyline, the penthouse, all faded until there was only warmth, rain, and the soft press of lips. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet. It was an admission. A dare. A promise of more. Avery pulled back slightly, forehead resting against Lucia's. You're dangerous, she murmured. Lucia laughed softly, breathless. You too. Their hands entwined, fingers locking as if both were afraid to let go. The rain drummed against the window behind them, a steady heartbeat marking the impossible truth. Nothing outside mattered anymore. Hours later, when the storm had passed, Avery and Lucia sat side by side on the sofa. No words were necessary. Their shoulders touched, a quiet tether stronger than titles, paychecks, or schedules. I shouldn't, Lucia said again, voice low. Shouldn't what? Avery murmured, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. This. You, me. All of this. Avery tilted her head, eyes dark and serious. We're not talking about shoulds anymore. We're talking about what's real. Lucia swallowed. Her pulse raced. But you're untouchable. Everyone expects things from you. I'm just. Lucia, Avery interrupted gently, taking her hand. No one else matters. Not tonight. Not here. You're not just anything. Lucia felt tears prick at her eyes, unbidden. She had spent years being careful, being invisible. And here, in the quiet aftermath of a storm, in the warmth of someone who saw her without expectation, she allowed herself to feel. Avery leaned in again, lips brushing her temple, then cheek, then finally resting close to her own ear. You're safe here. With me. Lucia's chest tightened. I want this, she whispered. Avery held her gaze. So do I. The words were simple. But for both women, they were monumental. For the first time, the lines that separated employer and employee, power and subservience, control and vulnerability, blurred completely. And for the first time, both understood they were stepping into something neither could fully anticipate, and neither wanted to stop. The morning after the storm, Avery Whitmore awoke with the city still wet and gleaming beneath her penthouse windows. Her body remembered what her mind struggled to process, the softness of Lucia's hand, the tentative heat of her lips. She dressed quickly, a tailored blouse and trousers, but even the precision of her outfit couldn't restore her usual sense of control. Every movement felt slightly off, uncalibrated. Her assistant, Clara, appeared in the doorway before Avery could reach her coffee. You look distracted, Clara said lightly, eyes sharp. Avery froze, then shook her head, forcing her voice flat. I'm fine. Clara didn't push. She had learned early in their working relationship that fine sometimes meant don't ask. But she made a mental note. Something had shifted. Across the city, Lucia returned to her own small flat. She hung her coat carefully, smoothing her damp hair, but every movement carried the weight of the previous night. She replayed it over and over, the rain, the kiss, the quiet acknowledgement in Avery's eyes. I shouldn't feel this, she told herself. She's my employer. It's impossible. Impossible, yes. But irresistible. At Whitmore Global Holdings, Avery's morning meetings were unusually tense. Daniel Mercer's usual barbs grated against her nerves more than usual, and she noticed herself snapping slightly, more sharply than normal. Clara observed quietly from the corner of the room. She noticed Avery's mind wandering, her pencil tapping impatiently against the glass tabletop. "You seem preoccupied," Clara said carefully after the meeting. Avery shook her head, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. "Not preoccupied," she lied. "Focused elsewhere." Clara didn't ask further. She already knew. By Wednesday evening, the tension between Avery and Lucia had begun to manifest in small ways. Lucia found herself lingering in the penthouse kitchen longer than necessary. She adjusted the positioning of silverware she had already arranged twice. She cleaned surfaces that were already spotless. And she thought about the kiss. Every time Avery entered a room, her pulse quickened. Every smile, every soft glance felt loaded. And then, Thursday arrived, the second date, again. The cafe this time was smaller, intimate, but not formal. A quiet corner table, candles flickering against the low lighting. Avery arrived first. She didn't wear a suit. She wore a soft gray sweater, trousers tailored but relaxed. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She looked approachable, human, a word rarely applied to her. Lucia arrived moments later, damp hair tucked behind her ears, a navy coat buttoned tightly. She paused at the entrance, taking a breath before stepping inside. Avery looked up from her phone and smiled. That smile, warm, tentative, real, stopped Lucia in her tracks. "Hi," Avery said. "Hi," Lucia replied. They sat. There was a pause, both aware of the weight of the previous night, the electricity still lingering. Avery spoke first. "You look wet." Lucia laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "London is relentless." They ordered coffee, and conversation began cautiously. Books, travel, music. But underneath every word, there was the memory of last night's intimacy. "I haven't stopped thinking about yesterday," Avery admitted finally. Her voice was low, almost confessional. Lucia's breath caught. "I haven't either," she whispered. The words were dangerous. She knew it. Avery knew it. But neither could stop the pull between them. Back at the penthouse, Clara was waiting. She had been observing the subtle shifts for weeks now, the late nights, the distracted mornings, the way Avery had smiled at nothing and yet everything. "You're falling," Clara said softly, startling Avery. Avery froze. "I am not." "Yes, you are," Clara interrupted gently. "And I didn't just orchestrate a date to see if it would work. I wanted you to have someone who sees you, not the CEO, not the powerhouse, not the untouchable. Just you." Avery blinked, caught. "Vulnerable. Not used to that." Clara continued, carefully. "But you need to be careful. Lucia, she's not just someone to admire from a distance. And she's not just part of your world. She's about to become complicated." Avery's jaw tightened. "I can handle complicated." Clara's eyes softened. "You think that. But love doesn't work like business. You can't control it. You can't negotiate it. And you can't predict it." Avery didn't respond. She knew Clara was right. Somewhere deep down, she did. That night, the line between professional and personal blurred further. Lucia stayed longer than usual in the penthouse, ostensibly to finish pressing shirts, but really to linger in the quiet proximity to Avery. They spoke softly. Not work. Not schedules. Not power. Just them. When Avery reached for a glass, their hands brushed. It was electric, intimate, deliberate this time. Lucia didn't pull away. Neither did Avery. The storm of emotion building between them was no longer subtle. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the penthouse, both women realized that there was no going back. The office smelled of polished wood, fresh coffee, and faint cologne. Avery Whitmore sat at her desk, reviewing projections, but her mind was elsewhere. Every spreadsheet, every revenue line, blurred against the image of Lucia's fingers brushing hers the night before. The knock came soft, measured. Avery didn't look up immediately. "Come in," she said. Clara entered, holding a folder and a carefully neutral expression. But the tension behind her eyes betrayed her. "You're late to the board review," Clara said lightly. "Yes," Avery admitted. "Traffic." Clara raised a brow. "Traffic at 8:30 in the penthouse elevator?" Avery paused. The sharp edge in Clara's tone made her stiffen. She hadn't realized how obvious she'd been. "You've been distracted," Clara continued. "For days now." Avery's hands hovered over her keyboard. She wanted to deflect, but Clara wasn't giving her an easy out. "I've had things to think about," she said carefully. Clara's gaze sharpened. "Like her?" Avery's throat went dry. "It's personal," she said finally. Clara's lips pressed together in a thin line. "Personal doesn't mean invisible, Avery. People notice. Especially her." The words hit like a warning. Avery stared at the folder Clara held, a stack of contracts waiting for signature. Normal business. But everything felt heavy now, like the air had changed. Lucia returned to the penthouse that evening with an excuse about a misplaced invoice she'd found. In reality, she lingered because she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't stop thinking about Avery. She entered quietly, stepping into the living room where Avery already stood by the window, rain still glinting off the glass. "You're back early," Avery observed, turning slowly. Lucia hesitated. "I wanted to finish some work." Avery studied her. Her fingers brushed the countertop as she passed. "You've been avoiding something," she said softly. Lucia's chest tightened. "No," she replied. "Yes," Avery countered, stepping closer. The distance between them shrank subtly, inevitably. "You're thinking about me." Lucia's pulse skipped. "I am not." "You are," Avery said gently. Her hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair behind Lucia's ear. "And I can't stop thinking about you." The honesty in her voice left Lucia breathless. It was dangerous. Forbidden. Yet entirely irresistible. Later, when they were alone in the kitchen, Clara appeared unexpectedly. "Evening," she said casually, but her eyes scanned the room with acute awareness. Lucia froze slightly, heart hammering. Avery's hand instinctively tightened around hers, a silent signal. Clara's gaze flicked between them. "I hope you're not," blurring lines. Avery straightened, face neutral, but her mind raced. "We're careful," she said. Clara's expression softened, but the warning remained. "Careful is relative," she said. "Especially when feelings are involved. Especially when one of you holds all the power." Lucia swallowed, aware of her precarious position. She was not just an employee anymore. Not now. Not after the kiss, not after the second date, not after tonight. "You should both know," Clara continued, "that perception matters. Actions have consequences. And people notice things, even small gestures." Avery didn't respond. She simply released Lucia's hand slowly, letting it fall to the counter. But the tension in the room lingered like a storm cloud. That night, after Clara had left, Avery and Lucia stood by the living room window. The city lights reflected in the glass like fractured stars. The room smelled faintly of coffee, rain, and unspoken longing. "I don't want this to end," Avery admitted softly. Lucia's eyes searched hers. "It can't continue like this," she said quietly. "Why not?" Avery asked. "Because you're powerful. I'm not. Because people notice, and because," she hesitated, voice trembling slightly. "Because I can't afford to be just a distraction." Avery closed the space between them. Her hands cupped Lucia's face gently, thumbs brushing against her cheeks. "You're not a distraction," she said. "You're everything I didn't know I wanted." Lucia's chest tightened. She knew it was dangerous. She knew it was reckless. But the truth in Avery's eyes made it impossible to retreat. Their lips met again, slower, more deliberate. Deeper this time. Electric. Consuming. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the world had contracted to just the two of them. And somewhere deep down, both women realized, the lines had blurred too far. They could no longer pretend that this was just a secret. The question now was, how far would they go before someone noticed? The office smelled of polished wood, leather, and faint coffee, but Avery Whitmore hardly noticed. She had arrived early, as always, yet her mind refused to settle. Every glance from Daniel Mercer, every word from the board felt like scrutiny, amplified by the secret she carried. Clara entered quietly, folder in hand, eyes scanning the room. "You need to focus," Clara said gently, though her tone carried the weight of unspoken warning. Avery straightened in her chair. "I am focused." Clara studied her, unconvinced. "For now." The words stung more than Avery cared to admit. Clara had a way of speaking truths that cut sharper than any boardroom argument. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate. Small, subtle, but unmistakable. "She's been different lately. Have you noticed how often Ms. Whitmore and the assistant linger in private? Something's going on." Avery ignored it. For now. She had handled skeptics before. She could handle this. But ignoring didn't make it disappear. Later that day, Avery found herself lingering in the kitchen, ostensibly for coffee, but really for the briefest moment of solitude. Lucia was there, carefully folding shirts. Their eyes met across the room, brief, loaded, electric. "Ms. Whitmore," Lucia said softly, trying to maintain composure. "Lucia," Avery replied, voice low. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them without thinking. Their hands brushed, again, and both felt the familiar surge of heat, the pulse of forbidden connection. "Are we being reckless?" Lucia whispered. "Possibly," Avery admitted. "But for the first time in years, I don't care." Lucia hesitated, heart hammering. I'm afraid of what happens if someone notices." Avery cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. "Then we deal with it. Together." Lucia's eyes searched hers. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Avery said firmly, voice quiet but certain. "I promise you that." But promises have limits. By Thursday, subtle changes were noticed. Daniel Mercer watched Avery closely during a late board review. Her attention drifted repeatedly, fingers tapping absent-mindedly. Her responses to questions were precise but slightly delayed, almost as if her mind was elsewhere. "Whitmore," Daniel said sharply, catching her mid-thought. "Are you listening?" Avery blinked, shaking herself free of the daydream. "Yes. Of course." Daniel leaned back, studying her with narrowed eyes. "You've been distracted. Something's happening. You're preoccupied." Avery's jaw tightened. "I'm fine." Daniel didn't believe her. No one ever did when she said that. Back in the penthouse, Clara appeared unexpectedly, concern etched on her face. "You need to be careful," she warned. "People are noticing. Noticing changes in you. Noticing how you interact with her." Avery felt a flicker of defensiveness. "It's personal," she said firmly. Clara shook her head. "It's never just personal when it affects your behavior at work. You can't isolate your heart and your office. It leaks, Avery. And right now, it's leaking." Avery stared at her, knowing she was right. That evening, rain tapped softly against the penthouse windows again. Avery and Lucia sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a deliberate distance between them, but the tension was palpable. You think people are suspicious, Avery said finally. I know they are, Lucia admitted. I feel it. And it scares me. Avery leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from Lucia's face. You don't have to be scared. Not with me. Lucia's chest tightened. I know. But it's dangerous. For both of us. Avery's voice softened. Love always is. The words hung in the air, undeniable, unflinching. Later, when the penthouse was quiet, Avery pulled Lucia closer. Fingers entwined. Foreheads pressed together. We can't stop it, Avery whispered. Lucia's breath hitched. I don't want to. And in that quiet, in that charged silence, both women knew, the game had changed. They were no longer careful. They were no longer just secret admirers. They were entangled in something that couldn't be undone easily. And someone was watching. Avery Whitmore had always thrived under pressure. High-stakes acquisitions, impossible deadlines, boardroom showdowns, she could handle it all. But this was different. The pressure wasn't coming from numbers, from markets, or even from investors. It was coming from within, her mind, her heart, and from the subtle, unrelenting awareness that someone was watching her more closely than she realized. It began with a whisper. She's changed, Daniel Mercer said during a mid-morning meeting. His eyes narrowed, scanning Avery as she signed off on contracts. More distracted. Less precise. Is everything okay? Avery froze for the barest second. Everything is fine, she replied evenly, though her hand trembled slightly as she placed a signature. Daniel studied her like a predator assessing prey. Are you sure? I am, she said, firmly. Now let's move on. But Daniel wasn't convinced, and neither was anyone else. By lunchtime, subtle murmurs had started circulating in the office. People were noticing Avery's late arrivals, her distracted responses, the lingering glances toward the administrative wing. And all of it pointed in one direction. Lucia noticed it too. She had arrived at the penthouse early that evening, intending to finish some administrative tasks, but Avery was already there, pacing in the living room, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed, a rare break in her usually immaculate appearance. You're tense, Lucia said softly. Avery paused, exhaling. People are noticing, she admitted. You and I, it's not subtle anymore. Lucia's chest tightened. I told you. This is dangerous. Yes, Avery replied, voice low. But I can't stop. Lucia's hand brushed against hers, an electric touch that sent warmth straight to her chest. Then we need rules, she whispered. Boundaries. Otherwise, this will destroy more than us. Avery shook her head. Rules won't help. Not anymore. And in that moment, both knew it was true. The first real consequence came the next morning. Clara appeared at Avery's office, urgency in her eyes. We have a problem, she said quietly. Avery frowned. What kind of problem? Someone from HR noticed, unusual interactions. They haven't acted yet, but whispers have started. Rumors can spread faster than evidence, Avery. If this isn't addressed carefully, it could become public. Avery's jaw tightened. I understand. Clara hesitated. Do you? This isn't just about optics. This is about your position, your authority, and her safety. Avery swallowed, the weight of truth pressing down. I know. By Thursday evening, the penthouse felt smaller than ever. Rain tapped against the glass, a steady drumbeat mirroring the pulse of anxiety and desire in the room. Lucia stood near the window, gazing at the streets below. Avery approached from behind, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You shouldn't be here, Lucia said softly, but she didn't move away. I have nowhere else to be, Avery murmured. Her fingers found Lucia's hand, lacing them together. Lucia's heart hammered. Avery, the office, the rumors. I don't care, Avery said simply, voice firm. Not anymore. Lucia exhaled sharply. It's reckless. Yes, Avery admitted. But love rarely isn't. They stood like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, rain streaming down the glass behind them. Then Avery leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. Do you trust me? Lucia's breath caught. With everything? Avery's lips brushed hers in a slow, deliberate kiss, full of the danger and intensity that had defined their secret from the start. Lucia responded, giving herself over despite the risk, despite the rumors, despite the consequences that loomed closer each day. Because some things, some people, were impossible to resist. And in that kiss, they both knew, there was no turning back. Avery Whitmore had built an empire on precision, control, and untouchable authority. Until now. The first cracks had appeared quietly, murmurs in the office, sharp glances, subtle whispers. But today, the exposure became undeniable. It started with a misplaced email. Lucia, ever careful, had drafted a schedule for the penthouse staff, inadvertently copying Avery's corporate address instead of her personal one. It was an innocent oversight. But the recipient was observant. Daniel Mercer. By 10 o'clock, Avery's inbox contained a single, taut message. We need to talk. Now. Avery didn't need to open it to know what it meant. She could feel the pulse of consequence threading through the room. Lucia arrived at the penthouse that evening, damp from the London drizzle. She had sensed Avery's tension over the phone, a rare crack in her normally composed tone. You look, Lucia began, searching for a safe word. Troubled. Avery ran a hand through her hair. I need to tell you something. Lucia's pulse jumped. What? Avery took a deep breath. Someone in the office has noticed our closeness. And it's not going to stay quiet for long. Lucia's heart sank. Do you fear they'll find out about us? Yes, Avery admitted. And you could be in danger too. Not physically, but professionally. Your position. Your safety. Everything I promised to protect. Lucia shook her head. I can handle it. If it's us, it's worth it. Avery's chest tightened. She stepped closer, brushing a damp strand of hair from Lucia's face. I don't want to lose you. Not to rumors, not to consequences, not to anything. The first confrontation came the next morning. Daniel Mercer was waiting in Avery's office, his expression sharp. Whitmore, we need clarity. Avery raised her brow. About what? The rumors, he said flatly. Staff have noticed irregularities in your behavior. Meetings missed. Private conversations with certain personnel. Late departures. This is concerning. Avery's jaw tightened. It's none of your business. Daniel leaned forward. It is my business when it affects operations, performance, and investor confidence. Are you engaging in inappropriate relationships with staff? Avery's pulse spiked. Every fiber of control in her body screamed. She could deny it. She could suppress it. She could command authority with a single glance. But the truth? The truth burned in her chest, undeniable. I am, she said finally, voice steady but sharp. And it doesn't affect my work. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This is highly irregular. And risky. You know the consequences if this reaches the board? I do, Avery replied evenly. And I will manage it. But I will not sacrifice what is mine to protect appearances. The room fell silent. Daniel studied her, measuring, calculating. He didn't push further, for now, but Avery knew the board wouldn't be as restrained. Back at the penthouse, Avery poured herself a glass of whiskey, uncharacteristically shaken. Lucia arrived, instantly sensing the tension. What happened? Complications, Avery said softly. Our secret is no longer safe. Someone knows, and it's only a matter of time before others notice. Lucia's hand found Avery's. Then we face it together, she whispered. Avery met her eyes. I want to. But it's not just us anymore. There are stakes, your career, my reputation. Everything could be threatened. Lucia swallowed. Then we fight. Together. Whatever happens. Avery leaned closer, resting her forehead against Lucia's. You make me reckless. I like reckless, Lucia whispered back, a smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. And for a fleeting moment, amidst the looming threat, the rain outside, and the world waiting to intervene, they allowed themselves to be only two people. Two hearts defying logic, consequence, and expectation. But both knew reality wouldn't wait forever. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and sterile coffee, but Avery Whitmore didn't notice. Her mind replayed the events of the previous days like a relentless film reel, whispers, suspicious glances, and Daniel Mercer's cold, precise interrogation. She had always controlled every element of her life. Every business move. Every image. Every perception. But now, she couldn't control this. Lucia. Her pulse quickened at the thought of her. At the memory of last night's touch, their lingering hands, their whispered confessions in the penthouse. At the office, the fallout began. The rumors had spread subtly, intentionally, like a virus. Staff whispered in hallways. Small mistakes were magnified. Avery's authority, for the first time, felt challenged, not by numbers, not by deals, but by perception. She ignored it at first, focusing on contracts and negotiations, until Clara appeared at her desk, sharp-eyed and steady. Avery, Clara said, voice low. You need to act before this spirals. I know, Avery admitted. But how do I control something I don't want to control? Clara's gaze softened. You don't. Not fully. You just choose how to respond. Choose what matters. And right now, her safety matters most. Avery exhaled, shoulders tense. You're right. That evening, Avery arrived at the penthouse earlier than usual. The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle, the city lights reflecting off slick streets below. Lucia was in the kitchen, quietly arranging cups and plates, but her focus was elsewhere. She looked up as Avery entered, tension evident in her posture. They know, Avery said immediately, cutting through pretense. Lucia froze. Who? Everyone who matters. People have noticed, and now whispers are reaching the board. This, us, it's no longer a secret. Lucia's chest tightened. Then what do we do? Avery stepped closer, closing the distance between them. We face it. Together. Lucia shook her head, eyes wide. But, you're powerful. I'm just me. I can't protect you if it gets messy. Avery cupped her face, thumb brushing against her cheek. Lucia, you don't have to protect me. You're already part of me. And I can't hide anymore. Not from anyone. Not from you. Lucia's lips parted, words catching in her throat. You mean, everything? Yes, Avery admitted, voice low and steady. Everything. The confession hung between them like a fragile bridge. Lucia's hand found Avery's, holding it tightly. I want everything too, she whispered. But I'm scared. Me too, Avery said softly. Terrified. But I can't walk away. Not from you. Not from us. Their foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling, hearts pounding in tandem. Then, slowly, deliberately, they kissed. Not tentative this time. Not testing boundaries. This was a kiss that claimed space, defied rules, and acknowledged everything they had kept hidden. It was desperate. It was real. It was them. Afterward, they collapsed onto the sofa, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of consequence pressing at the edges of their reality. Avery whispered, voice rough with emotion, no matter what happens tomorrow, or the day after. I don't regret this. Not a second. Lucia pressed her face against Avery's chest. Neither do I. The rain outside continued to fall softly, a quiet witness to their declaration. For the first time, they weren't just CEO and employee, or secret admirers. They were partners in something greater than either had anticipated, something worth the risk, worth the chaos, worth everything. And deep down, both knew that the days ahead would test them. Their secret was exposed. The office world would be unforgiving. And their hearts would demand reckoning. But for tonight, they had each other. And that was enough. Avery Whitmore rarely lost control. Rarely. But today, as she walked through the halls of Whitmore Global Holdings, every glance, every whispered conversation, every subtle nod of acknowledgement reminded her that her world had shifted irreversibly. The rumors had reached the board. Not overtly, but carefully, like a shadow brushing the edges of her authority. And Avery, who had always commanded attention and respect, felt the fragile tremor of vulnerability for the first time. Lucia was waiting for her in the executive suite when she arrived. Her eyes bright, posture slightly tense, but undeniably magnetic. Avery's pulse quickened at the sight of her. "You came early," Lucia said softly. "I needed a moment," Avery replied, closing the door behind her. "Before the meetings start. Before everything else." Lucia studied her carefully. "You look tired." "Exposed," Avery admitted. "And slightly reckless." Lucia's hand brushed against hers. A spark. An electric jolt that neither could ignore. "You're dangerous," Lucia whispered. "You make me dangerous," Avery replied. The morning meetings were a delicate minefield. Investors noticed Avery's slight distraction, but her execution remained impeccable. She responded to questions, countered arguments, and signed contracts with the precision of a master strategist. But her mind kept drifting, to the warmth of Lucia's hand, the softness of her lips, the undeniable pull between them. By lunchtime, the subtle stares had grown sharper. Colleagues noticed the way Avery lingered near the administrative office, the small, loaded smiles exchanged between her and Lucia. And someone finally asked. "Whitmore," Daniel Mercer said, voice clipped during the afternoon debrief. "Do you think it's appropriate, your recent interactions with your assistant?" Avery's pulse spiked. "Appropriate by whose standards?" she replied evenly. "By professional standards," he said, watching her carefully. "Staff are talking. Rumors are spreading." Avery leaned forward, gaze steady. "And yet, results haven't suffered. Operations remain strong. Staff respect my decisions. And my private life is exactly that. Private." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're risking perception. Influence. Authority. Everything you've built." "I am aware," Avery said calmly. "And I've made my choice." Back at the penthouse, the tension gave way to desire. Lucia waited with a quiet intensity, her presence magnetic, impossible to resist. Avery closed the door, letting the city's hum fade into irrelevance. "We can't hide anymore," Avery murmured, approaching her. "I don't want to," Lucia replied, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. Avery's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Then we won't. Not from each other." And in that moment, the carefully maintained boundaries of the office world became meaningless. Their connection ignited. Avery pressed against her, lips brushing hers in a kiss that carried months of suppressed desire. Hands traced familiar paths, discovering new ones. The penthouse became a sanctuary and a battlefield all at once. Lucia gasped, breathless. "Avery, someone could." "Not now," Avery whispered against her lips. "Just this. Just us." Time collapsed around them. The world outside, the office, the board, the gossip, the consequences, ceased to exist. There was only this moment. Only the heat, the pull, the undeniable truth of their attraction. And in that heat, both realized that whatever awaited them outside these walls rumors, judgment, consequences. They would face it together. Because desire, once ignited, could not be extinguished. The city lights of London flickered like fractured stars through the rain-streaked windows of the penthouse. Avery Whitmore never allowed herself distractions. Not from work, not from deals, not from the meticulously ordered life she had built. Until now. Lucia's presence had become a gravitational force Avery couldn't resist. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every shared moment was magnetic, electric, consuming. The risk was delicious. Lucia was in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa, a book in her hands. She wasn't reading, Avery knew that, but the pretense was cute, almost teasing. "You're distracted," Lucia said softly, eyes flicking up from the pages. "I'm focused," Avery replied, voice low, but the heat in her chest betrayed her. Lucia's smile was small, knowing. "Focused on me?" Avery stepped closer, each stride deliberate, calculated. "Perhaps," she admitted. The air between them thickened, charged with tension neither wanted to release too soon. Lucia closed the book, setting it aside, standing to face Avery fully. Her pulse quickened at the nearness. "We're taking risks," she whispered. "Yes," Avery agreed, brushing a damp strand of hair from Lucia's forehead. "And some risks are worth it." Their lips met. This time, no hesitation. No testing boundaries. Just fire. Hands moved with familiarity and urgency, discovering, claiming, daring. Every touch was a reminder of the danger they courted, and the temptation they could no longer resist. Outside, London hummed, indifferent to the storm inside the penthouse. Avery pulled back briefly, resting her forehead against Lucia's. "Do you understand the stakes?" Lucia nodded, breathless. "I do. And I don't care." Avery's lips found hers again, a slow, deliberate kiss. "You're reckless," she murmured between kisses. "And you love it," Lucia countered. Avery laughed softly, a rare, intimate sound. "Yes." The following week, the office became a minefield. Even with their careful secrecy, whispers had grown. Staff exchanged knowing looks, subtle observations that spoke louder than words. Daniel Mercer's eyes lingered more often than usual, and Clara's sharp gaze reminded Avery constantly that discretion was fragile. But each risk only deepened the allure. One afternoon, Avery called Lucia to her office. The doors closed behind them, the penthouse office suddenly feeling like the only world that existed. "You shouldn't be here," Lucia said softly. "I need you," Avery admitted. "Not for work. Not for appearances. I need you." Lucia stepped closer. "I'm here," she said simply, letting the tension melt into desire. Their hands intertwined. Fingers laced, arms wrapped, lips met in a kiss that burned hotter than the city outside. The boundaries of professional, personal, risk, and desire collapsed entirely. For Avery and Lucia, the game had changed. And neither wanted to stop playing. The penthouse was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city outside and the occasional drip of rain sliding down the windows. Avery Whitmore sat at the edge of the sofa, elbows resting on her knees, fingers interlaced. She wasn't reviewing reports. She wasn't planning acquisitions. She wasn't thinking like the CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings. She was thinking about Lucia. Lucia appeared in the doorway, her expression careful, measured, but with an unmistakable warmth in her eyes. She moved closer slowly, as if approaching a fragile truth. "We need to talk," she said softly, voice barely above the quiet hum of the city. Avery looked up. "About what?" "About us," Lucia said simply. Avery felt the familiar surge of heat in her chest. "There's not much to say," she said. "I want you. You know that." Lucia shook her head. "No. I mean, everything. What this means. What we're risking. How far this goes." Avery's heart tightened. "I know." Lucia sat beside her, their shoulders touching. I'm not just afraid of being seen, she admitted. I'm afraid of losing you. Of everything changing if this goes wrong. And I don't know if I can handle that. Avery reached for her hand, holding it gently. Lucia, look at me. Lucia did, and Avery's dark eyes held nothing but certainty and vulnerability. You won't lose me, she said firmly. No rumor, no office politics, no risk, nothing, will take you from me. Do you understand? Lucia swallowed hard, letting the words sink in. I think I do. Avery leaned closer, their foreheads touching. Then stop worrying about what could go wrong. Stop hiding how you feel. Because I love you. All of you. Every piece. And I won't, pretend otherwise. Lucia's breath caught, tears threatening, a smile breaking through her fear. I love you too, she whispered. For a moment, the world fell away. No boardrooms. No whispers. No risk of exposure. Just Avery. Just Lucia. Just this fragile, perfect truth. Avery brushed her lips against Lucia's temple, then her cheek, finally pressing her mouth to hers in a kiss that was tender, fierce, and irrevocable. I've waited too long to feel like this, Avery murmured against her lips. Too long to hide it. And I've wanted this, Lucia admitted. More than I ever thought I could. Outside, the rain fell steadily. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken promises. They sat together, holding each other, sharing silent confessions and lingering touches. Both knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, whispers, scrutiny, consequences. But for now, there was only the truth they had claimed together. And in that quiet moment, Avery realized something vital. Love, reckless and impossible though it was, had become the most powerful force in her carefully ordered life. She would face anything to protect it. Lucia squeezed her hand. Whatever happens next. Avery smiled, dark and certain. We face it together. Always. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city wet and shining. But inside the penthouse, a new storm had begun, one built of desire, love, and the courage to defy expectation. And neither of them would ever look back. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Global Holdings, but Avery Whitmore barely noticed. Her mind was on the board's reactions, the whispers in the office, and the careful observation of Daniel Mercer, whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. Her empire demanded perfection. Control. Image. But this was chaos. And it was delicious. Lucia arrived at the penthouse later that evening, a folder of reports in hand, ostensibly for review. Avery glanced up from her desk. You don't need to carry that here, she said softly. Lucia's lips curved into a small, teasing smile. I like being where you are, she said. The tension between them, unspoken and undeniable, crackled like static in the air. Hands brushed accidentally, or not, against countertops, papers, and eventually each other. You've been distracted, Lucia whispered. At the office. Even in meetings. People notice. I know, Avery admitted. And I don't care. Lucia's chest tightened. Avery, you're risking everything. And I'm not afraid, Avery replied, stepping closer. Not with you. The penthouse became their sanctuary. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every stolen moment was magnified by the danger outside. And that danger only made their desire more urgent. Avery pulled Lucia into her arms. Lips met. Fingers tangled in hair. The world outside, investors, gossip, scrutiny, ceased to exist. Lucia gasped, breathless. We can't be this reckless, she whispered. We already are, Avery replied, voice low and intimate. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The kisses deepened, hands roaming, bodies pressing closer. It was passion tempered with tenderness, fire wrapped in intimacy. For both of them, each touch was a promise. We survive the world together. By the next day, subtle consequences began to show. Staff whispered more openly. Daniel Mercer lingered in hallways, questioning, observing. And Avery, powerful, untouchable, always in control, found herself navigating the scrutiny while keeping her composure. "You're unshakable," Clara remarked, quietly observing Avery in the conference room. Avery smiled faintly. "I've faced worse." Clara studied her. "This isn't worse." "Not exactly. It's personal. And personal has a way of destroying even the strongest empires if you let it." "I won't let it," Avery said firmly. "I'm not letting anyone or anything take this from me. From us." That night, the penthouse hummed with quiet intensity. Lucia lingered near the sofa, shoulders brushing against Avery's. Fingers intertwined. Lips met in slow, deliberate kisses, tasting, claiming, holding. Avery pressed her against the window, watching the rain streak across the glass. "Do you feel it?" she murmured. "Every second," Lucia whispered. "Good," Avery said, voice low and commanding. "Because I'm not stopping. Not now. Not ever." And for the first time, both women understood the truth. Love, desire, and passion didn't care for power, reputation, or rules. They only cared about survival, and Avery and Lucia were determined to survive together, no matter the cost. The office felt colder than usual that morning. Avery Whitmore's heels clicked against the polished marble floors, but the sound seemed louder somehow, echoing the tension in her chest. Whispers followed her from conference rooms to hallways. Staff exchanged subtle glances. Even the janitorial staff seemed to notice the way her focus had shifted. Daniel Mercer's presence was constant, shadowing her like a hawk, eyes sharp, probing for weakness. And Avery knew, she had already become the story everyone was quietly talking about. By lunchtime, the whispers had become questions veiled as casual conversation. "Did you see how she lingered near the administrative wing?" one employee asked another, eyes darting toward Avery's office. "She's different," another replied. "More distracted. Something's going on." Avery walked past them, mask in place, heart racing. She had faced scrutiny before. But this felt intimate. Personal. Dangerous. That evening, Avery returned to the penthouse to find Lucia already there, waiting with a quiet intensity that made her knees weaken. "You look tired," Lucia said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Avery's face. "I'm fine," Avery replied, though her pulse betrayed her. Lucia stepped closer. "It's not just the office. It's us. People notice. And I feel like we're dancing on the edge of a cliff." Avery smiled, dark and certain. "Then let's fall together." The temptation between them had become impossible to ignore. Hands brushed. Lips met. Every touch was amplified by the risk surrounding them. The thrill of secrecy made every kiss sharper, every glance more electric. Lucia gasped softly, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Avery, we're taking dangerous risks." "I know," Avery whispered, fingers tangled in her hair. "And I want every single one." Their lips met again, and this time, the kiss was desperate, claiming, unapologetic. The world outside, the whispers, the scrutiny, the threats, faded entirely. But danger wasn't done with them. The next morning, a note appeared on Avery's desk. "People are watching. Be careful. Not everything can stay hidden." No signature. No clue who left it. But Avery's chest tightened instantly. Someone knew. Or at least suspected. Clara arrived moments later, sharp-eyed and serious. "You received it too," she said quietly. Avery nodded. "Yes." Clara's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "This is your warning. You can't ignore it. If you continue like this, someone could use it against you. Against her. Against both of you." Avery's jaw clenched. "Then we double down." carefully. But we don't stop. Not now. Not ever. Clara studied her, eyes hard but understanding. You're reckless. Avery smirked faintly. I'm in love. That night, back at the penthouse, the rain fell steadily, streaking down the windows. Lucia pressed herself against Avery, warmth and desire igniting between them. Even with everything? She asked softly. Even with everything, Avery replied, lips brushing against hers. Hands moved, hearts raced, and for a brief moment, the world ceased to exist. They were reckless, exposed, and dangerously in love. And neither of them cared. Avery Whitmore had faced boardroom battles, investor revolts, and hostile takeovers, but nothing prepared her for this. A soft knock on the penthouse door made her heart skip a beat. She knew who it was before the door even opened. Daniel Mercer stepped in, eyes sharp and calculating, but his voice careful. Whitmore, we need to talk. Avery's pulse quickened. About? About your relationship with your assistant, Daniel said. His gaze flicked briefly toward the living room, where Lucia sat, silent, tense. Avery's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. We're private citizens outside work, she said evenly. This doesn't affect operations. Daniel studied her for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, his tone softened. People are talking. Investors are noticing. You may be risking more than you realize. Avery's eyes narrowed. I'm aware. And I accept the risk. Lucia stood then, placing herself slightly in front of Avery. It's our life, she said firmly, voice steady. We're careful. And it's no one else's business. Daniel's eyes lingered on her, then Avery, before he finally exhaled. Just, be cautious. The higher you rise, the more dangerous secrets become. Avery let him leave, door closing with a soft click. The encounter left the room charged, tension lingering like static in the air. Lucia's hand found Avery's, fingers entwined. That was intense, she whispered. Yes, Avery admitted, voice low. But necessary. We can't hide forever. And maybe, we don't have to. The words were a spark. The danger, the scrutiny, the thrill, they all fed the heat between them. Avery leaned closer, lips brushing Lucia's. You feel it too, don't you? Lucia's pulse raced. Every second, she admitted. The penthouse became their refuge and their battlefield. Kisses deepened, touches lingered, and every moment of physical closeness carried both desire and risk. The world outside, the office, the rumors, the consequences, melted away in the heat of their connection. Lucia gasped softly, heart racing. Avery, someone could see. Someone could. Not now, Avery whispered, fingers tangled in her hair. Not here. Not this moment. Just us. They surrendered to the passion that had been simmering for weeks. Every brush of lips, every touch of skin, every whispered word was a declaration. Love, reckless and unrestrained, could not be denied. Afterward, they collapsed together on the sofa, breathing in sync, the tension melting into quiet intimacy. Avery rested her forehead against Lucia's. We're taking a risk with everything, she murmured. I know, Lucia replied, tracing a finger along Avery's chest. And I'd take it 1,000 times over. Avery smiled faintly. Then let's face the world together. Secrets, whispers, danger, all of it. Lucia leaned into her, lips brushing hers one final time for the night. Always together. Outside, London's light sparkled through the rain-streaked windows, indifferent to the storm that raged inside the penthouse, a storm built of love, desire, and unbreakable devotion. And neither Avery nor Lucia would ever look back. Avery Whitmore had built her life around control. Every deal, every contract, every image carefully managed, polished, untouchable. Until now. The news hit quietly at first, a subtle mention in a business newsletter, a hushed comment from a board member. But within hours, whispers had spread through Whitmore Global Holdings. Staff glanced, muttered, and avoided eye contact. Investors called with veiled questions. The media, always hungry for scandal, had begun circling. And in the center of it all stood Avery, powerful, untouchable, and entirely exposed. She arrived at the penthouse that evening to find Lucia waiting, her face pale but resolute. "They know," Lucia said softly. "I know," Avery replied, voice low but steady. "I saw it today. The emails. The looks. The calls." Lucia's chest tightened. "This is bad." "It could be," Avery admitted. "But it doesn't change us. Not us. Not what we have." They stood close, fingers laced, as though holding onto each other could shield them from the storm outside. The confrontation came that night. Avery's phone buzzed incessantly. Board members. Investors. Staff. Rumors had leaked beyond the office. Some praised her honesty, some questioned her judgment. And Daniel Mercer's voice cut through it all when she answered. "Whitmore," he said sharply. "You realize the potential fallout? This isn't just internal. People outside are noticing now. Are you prepared to handle it?" Avery's jaw tightened. "I don't just handle it. I own it. And I will protect what matters most. Nothing will touch her. Nothing will touch us." Daniel was silent for a moment, then, "You're daring. Reckless. But perhaps committed. Just know there will be consequences." "I know," Avery said, hanging up. Lucia stepped closer, voice trembling. "Are we okay?" Avery cupped her face, brushing hair from her forehead. "We're more than okay. We're alive. We're together. And that's more than anyone else can take from us." Lucia exhaled slowly, relief mingled with lingering fear. "Even with everything, exposure, rumors, risk?" "Even then," Avery replied. "Because love, real love, is worth every risk." They sank onto the sofa together, the city lights outside streaked with rain. Hands intertwined. Lips pressed softly, deliberately. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was both comfort and defiance, a shield against the storm of scrutiny that raged outside their walls. "I've never felt this before," Lucia admitted, voice shaking. "Neither have I," Avery whispered. "And I never want to let it go." The storm outside the penthouse windows mirrored the chaos in their lives. But inside, they had found their own calm. Their own truth. Their own unshakable bond. And for the first time, Avery realized that even in exposure, even in danger, their love made them untouchable. No gossip. No boardroom. No scrutiny could take that from them. The penthouse was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of evening lights and the faint hum of London below. Avery Whitmore sat on the edge of the sofa, a glass of wine in hand, watching Lucia move through the room with effortless grace. For months, they had danced on the edge, secrets, whispers, desire, and risk. They had faced scrutiny, rumors, and the harsh glare of a world that didn't always understand love that defied expectation. And yet, here they were. Lucia approached, her hand brushing against Avery's. "We made it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Avery set her glass aside and took her hand, holding it tightly. "We did," she said firmly. "Against every rumor, every risk, every obstacle, we made it." Lucia's eyes glimmered. "I can't believe how far we've come." Avery smiled softly, brushing a damp strand of hair from Lucia's face. "I believe it. Because we fought for it. And because I can't imagine my life without you." They sank onto the sofa together, foreheads pressed, hands entwined. The storm of exposure had passed. The office whispers had quieted. Their world, though still imperfect, was theirs. "I love you," Avery murmured, voice low and unshakable. "I love you too," Lucia replied, pressing a soft kiss to Avery's lips. Always. For the first time, they could breathe. Truly. The months of secrecy, temptation, and risk had forged something unbreakable. Every stolen glance, every clandestine kiss, every moment of defiance had led to this, a love both reckless and real, both passionate and enduring. Avery held her close, heart steady despite the chaos they had endured. "No more hiding," she said. "No more pretending. We face the world together." Lucia smiled, laying her head against Avery's shoulder. "Together," she echoed. Outside, London shimmered beneath the night sky. Rain-slick streets reflected neon lights, distant sirens hummed, and life went on. Inside the penthouse, time slowed. The world could wait. The board could wait. Rumors could wait. Because here, in this room, in this moment, Avery and Lucia had everything. Love. Passion. Trust. And the courage to face whatever came next, side by side. Avery whispered against Lucia's hair, "We've earned this. Every risk, every challenge, it all led us here. And I wouldn't change a single moment." Lucia lifted her head, smiling through tears. "Neither would I." They kissed again, slow and unhurried, savoring the triumph of love that had survived exposure, scrutiny, and doubt. And as they held each other close, Avery and Lucia knew with perfect certainty. Whatever the future held, challenges, temptations, storms, they would face it together. Always.